Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Food for Mzansi's Gather to Grow. My name is Dawn Numdu. I'm the editor for audience and engagement at Food for Mzansi, and I'm joined tonight by my awesome co-host, farmer Gugulethu Mahlangu. Good evening, Gugu. Tonight we're talking all things cotton farming. How are you doing?
Good evening, Dawn. I'm doing very well, thank you. And thanks for Food for Mzansi for hosting such an important topic. I'm really excited to be here.
And we'll get the show right on the road. This time, just to welcome our speakers, I'm going to ask each of them just to unmute their microphones and to introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Annette. Ladies first.
My name is Annette Bennet. I'm the technical manager at Cotton SA, and I look after the research, the distribution of technical information, anything that's got to do with anything technical, on the production side, of course.
Welcome, Annette. Thank you so much for joining us here on Gather to Grow. Petros Sithole, over to you.
My name is Petros Sithole. I'm a cotton farmer. I had been an extension officer on cotton for some years before I retired and became a farmer. I'm now the chairperson of the secondary cooperative in Komazi, known as the Bombo Agricultural Secondary Cooperative.
Welcome, Petros Sithole. Thank you so much for joining us. And then last, we have Tertius Schoeman. Welcome, Mr. Schoeman. You are now the most tech-savvy and most Twitter-savvy person in your family.
I'm Tertius Schoeman. I'm the Transformation and Agricultural Development Manager for Cotton SA. My main task is to look after the smallholder farmers in South Africa. That is basically my job description.
So now we have introductions from all of our speakers tonight, Gugu. I'm looking forward to a very fruitful conversation. And to kick off, I'm going to give over to Mr. Sithole first to tell us a little bit about his journey in cotton farming and also what people would need to know to get started in this industry.
I had been an extension officer for the cotton. That's where I learned that cotton can alleviate poverty in poverty-stricken areas, especially as we know South Africa is a water-scarce country. In most places where you can cultivate, there is no water for irrigation. In some instances, you'll find that the rainfall, the distribution of the rainfall in some areas is not enough. The spacing between this rain and the coming rain is too wide for other crops to thrive. So cotton can withstand that dilemma that is there. Cotton can thrive such instances. So what I have also noticed is that cotton will just not die, but will just wait for the next rain to come. Then if you want to get it easy in cotton farming, it's better to do it in groups so that you can share the resources like tractors and all the implements that you can use. And so you can farm together so that you can harvest together and you can share all the resources that are there. So in our area, for instance, in Komazi, there are 29 primary cooperatives working almost together, and that makes it easier because you can help those farmers that are lazy to also learn. So we teach each other in that way.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sithole. So as I understand it, Dr. Annette Bennet, cotton is a very versatile crop, and there's lots of opportunities for also creating byproducts. Could you perhaps shed some light on this specifically, and then we'd maybe get into some of the other technical details that Petros Sithole just highlighted as well?
Cotton is actually a great crop because it provides an income for the farmer. And then further down the value chain, of course, there are many products that can be made from cotton. The farmer, when he delivers his cotton to the gin is like a mold that removes the seed from the fiber, and then the lint or the fiber is sold. And then there are some byproducts that are made from the seed. Firstly, the main thing in South Africa is that the seed is used as cattle feed. It's also sometimes it's very good for ruminants because it's got gospel in so they can digest it. It can also be fed in small quantities for other animals. So the seed is the main byproduct in South Africa for farmers. And then also the seed can be used to press. We have an oil press in Marble, sort of a new oil press, super oil mills. And the seed can be made, the oil can be extracted for food purposes, for soaps, for medical purposes. And then the hulls of the seed, it's like the outside of the seed, they can be used for bedding and all sorts of other products. South Africa is not big on byproducts because our production is not optimal. We would like to increase our production considerably, but there are many other products, medical products, cotton wool, female hygienic products, gauze, all these kind of products that can be made from cotton. So it's really a great crop. It's the only crop where the fiber and the seed and the whole can be used. Even the plants, the whole plant can be used. Like small-scale farmers, Petros can also tell you that the small-scale farmers, after they've harvested their cotton, they can actually use the plants for their cattle to feed on. And then after a while, the cotton are slashed. So it's a very versatile
Wow, sounds very, very interesting, Annette. And I think I'd like to move on to Mr. Sithole, just for him to explain to us, how do we even go about planting cotton? He mentioned temperatures, ideal climates, which regions in South Africa would be the best to grow cotton? And how do we grow it, Mr. Sithole? Do we grow it from seeds? What kind of inputs do we need just to grow this cotton?
Yes, we need seed, which is a costly commodity, but we need a little bit of fertilizers. And we need some chemicals to control the weeds and also chemicals to control some insects. When we plant a seed, we have to plant it when the heat units are ideal. Ideally, if you want the good stand that can be used for the drought-stricken areas, even by hand, you can also plant in our area so that we can easily space the plants a good way to get a stand that can withstand the drought. We use herbicides, glyphosate, I mean to say, that is Roundup to control the weeds, because we use BT cotton in South Africa, which has this chemical in them. You just spray over and weeds die and the cotton will thrive. So it was also inserted with ball guard in such a way that some of the worms which attack the cotton will be controlled. But then that means that when you are a farmer, you need to listen carefully and you need to make use of a refuge area. That is the area where you plant non-BT cotton so that you can fight resistance by the insects that can come and be resistant. And then it means that the technology will be useless if that happens.
Interesting, Mr. Sithole. Thank you so much for sharing that. Annette, I'd like to also just come to you because you mentioned cotton being a high-value commodity crop. And, recently, in the late 80s or 90s, South Africa used to produce about 80,000 tons of cotton lint. But in the recent years, production was down to 5,000 tons. What is being done to ensure that more farmers are getting into the cotton industry?
As an organization, I think we are always encouraging farmers to plant cotton, for several reasons. Because it's a great rotational crop for farmers. So we try to encourage them in rotation with other crops. Petros also mentioned it's a really good, well-adapted dryland crop. So the farmers in the dryland areas can use it in rotation with maize and even with sunflower. But at the moment, it's really preferably used in rotation with maize and soya. A lot of the maize in South Africa has also got similar technology, herbicide-tolerant technology that cotton has, as well as the soya. So it serves as a very good crop where you can spray the same product with the same products, some of the same products, not all of them, with the same active ingredient. You can use it to spray over the crop. So it helps the dryland farmers a lot with weed control. So the herbicides are selective for particular weeds. And then in these areas, it just really makes it easier for the farmer to farm cotton. And because it's well adapted for dryland, a big area that is developing is in the Swaziland area where there's a water table. So the farmers there are very keen to plant cotton. And if we can get the right varieties, it's adapted for that area, got a slightly shorter growing season, then there's a lot of potential in hectares to expand in that area. On irrigation, it's also used as a rotational crop for sugarcane. There are some of the farmers in Mr. Dreyer, the Mkuzi area, he found that it's a very good crop in rotation with sugarcane and sugar beans, and that he gets a much higher yield on the next planting of sugarcane. From Cotton SA side, we're always encouraging farmers to look at production methods to cut down on input costs and to get higher yields. And the technology that we have available, although it's an older technology, it's present in all our cultivars. It really helps the farmer to farm clever and not to spray too much insecticides, because you only have to spray for secondary insects on the cotton. We get very good yields under irrigation. I think the average yield is just over 4,000, about 4,500 kilograms, but we can get yields up to 6,500 tons per hectare. It's a fantastic crop under irrigation and should preferably be planted under irrigation. But, for dryland areas, it should be a choice crop to plant. So we're doing all we can to increase and to motivate farmers to plant. And if we can get access to new technologies, and, I think Cotton SA has been working a long time now, more than a few years with the patent holders to try and get them to commit to bring in new technology, which would give us a wider choice of cultivars and varieties and a wider choice of herbicides to spray on the cotton. We're looking at new technologies, new varieties to get farmers to maybe then be more interested even as the moment, to expand in their production.
Thank you so much, Annette, for that very clear overview of the industry. I just wanted to get Tertius to come into the conversation. I mean, when I first started reading up about cotton farming, I know that there was a whole lingo to learn in terms of what is a ginnery. Could you maybe take us through some of the things that people would know? And the January is not where you make gin that you can drink, of course. So could you perhaps take us through the cotton farming vocabulary, if that's what I can call it?
Yes, that's very interesting. Remember, I myself had to learn from the first time I met Petra Sitole in 2014. I had to learn all of this myself. So first of all, of course, then there's the cotton plant. The harvest that is being harvested from the cotton, that is seed cotton. So when you see the white crop in the field, that we call the seed cotton, and then it's being taken to the ginnery, cotton ginnery, where Dr. Bennett has said the seed and the dirt is being, separated. The lint, of course, is being made into the spinners, where they weave afterwards. Weaving and knitting is being done, and eventually the clothes we are wearing. And on the other side, the seed, like she explained, is being used. And once the lint goes, through the cotton gin, then it's lint, and then it goes to the spinners. So the spinners is a massive processing process where they take the cotton lint and they make thread of it. The small thread that you have in your house, uyatunga, then that type of stuff you use to do pairs on clothes, that's the thread. Yeah, so that's basically, in short, the cotton is on the field between 5 and 6 months, and it's a summer crop. They mentioned earlier, cotton is a crop that needs a lot of hot weather. The more sunshine it gets, the better quality cotton you will have. So areas like Makatini, Komazi, north of Bushbuck Ridge, the whole northern part, Waipi, Thembe, Sekakuni, Springbok Flats. If you go further west towards northwest alongside Northern Cape, alongside the Orange River, wherever you find the hot weather over the summertime, there you will find the opportunity to plant cotton.
Thank you so much for that, Tertius. Maybe we can talk about some of the production costs and also if it's intensive. Is it an intensive crop? I think Mrs. Sithole was talking about labor earlier a little bit as well. Annette, could you maybe explain a little bit that?
Let me shortly discuss input costs for commercial farming, and then maybe Tertius can expand on the small-scale farming. I think for commercial farming, the input cost that's really expensive is the fertilizer. At the moment, the prices have gone up. I'm not sure exactly how much, but it's probably around 30% that I understand, even more. So the input cost for commercial farming under irrigation is around 35,000 Rand per hectare, which is quite a lot. In the past, the farmers could get by with around about 26 to 28,000 Rand a hectare. And then, of course, what is very expensive is the picking cost, the pickers, the big harvesters that they have to pick the cotton. And then the price for the farmers get, the price of cotton is very good at the moment. They get around about 10 Rand 50 per kilogram for the seed cotton. So when they arrive at the gin with the big truck with the big bales, they get a price per seed cotton per kilogram. That's around about 10 Rand 50 at the moment. And then the irrigation, I said 33 to 35,000 Rand input cost. Then at about 10 Rand 50 per kilogram for the seed cotton. Then their profit works at around 9 to 10,000 Rand per hectare. That's about under irrigation. Under dry land, that's the rain-fed cotton, farmers get about a yield of 1,200 kilogram per hectare. So sometimes it's 800 kilograms per hectare. Some very good farmers get even higher than that, but the average is around 800 kilogram to 1,200 kilogram per hectare. And also at a price of 10 Rand 50 per kilogram seed cotton, they can get a net profit of around about 4,000 Rand per hectare. It all depends on the yield per hectare and the cost of the input cost that they used per hectare. So that would determine at the end what their net profit would be. So it's expensive to farm cotton, but it's a cash crop and you can still get a good income where otherwise you could maybe under dryland not even plant a crop. So at least you can get something. There are some of the dryland farmers that says if they can't plant cotton, they can't plant anything else. So it's still a choice for dryland farmers to plant cotton. And then, of course, on irrigation, preferably with a net profit of over 10,000 Rand per hectare is a good income for a farmer. Maybe Tertius can expand on the small-scale farm.
Thank you so much, Annette. Your inputs, Tertius, on this one?
Thank you very much, Dr. Annette. That's a lot said in a small time, but that is the crux of cotton production. We see cotton for the smallholders, especially in the rural areas. When the weather is like this, hot, and Petra Sitole has also pointed that out, is that maize and other crops usually don't do well, especially when there's little rain. With cotton, you will always have a crop because it originally comes from the desert. We suggest to smallholder farmers to plant cotton in hot areas where they have 1 or 2 hectares, preferably. And we would like to see smallholder farmers to have at least 50 hectares of dryland cotton and about 10 hectares of irrigation cotton, because then they can make a fair livelihood from that. There's lots of land available, especially in the hot areas. And one of the first things we have a look at is to see that there's a road to the field. We need to be able to, once we want to mentor, especially the extension officers from the cotton ginneries, if they want to go out to the smallholder farmer, or us from Cotton SA, we would like to get to the field, we need to have fencing because it's very interesting. Cotton is a very palatable crop for farm animals, wild animals. It's actually sweet to the taste. So it needs to be fenced, the fields needs to be fenced. And of course, once you want to do mechanization, all the rocks and stumps need to be removed. And yes, like Peter has said, we prefer people to belong to an organization where we gather people and train. For instance, the Lebombo Agricultural Secondary Co-op, the members, the participating farmers, has got a 3-year BCI, Better Cotton Initiative license. So they are certified, internationally certified, sustainable cotton farmers. And we are very proud of them. And you can go to their field. You will see very good practices of cultivation, of harvesting. Annette said the irrigation farmers need to have big harvesters. But with the smallholders, it's an opportunity for job creation. The national standard is around about 1.35 persons per hectare. For each hectare the smallholder planting, there will be 1.35 persons being employed in that fields over that period. So it's definitely a good job creator because it can be harvested by hand. It's not perishable. So it's not a lot of the vegetables and fruits that will go off once the bowls is burst open. You have a bit of time to harvest it as quick as possible, once you have it out of the bowl, the coloring will go yellow because the spinners and everyone wants white cotton. So it's a crop that the smallholders can harvest by hand. They can spray with a rucksack spray. And yes, Paymaster cultivar is developed for smallholders. You can't harvest that with a machine, but you can harvest it by hand because it's got a hairy stem. But Dr. Annette is the boffin on this. But this is in short the background to smallholder cotton farming.
Thank you so much, Mr. Schoeman, for that explanation. And, it sounds like cotton is a gem, a white gem of South Africa. And it's really interesting that we are only finding out about this now in this space. So shout out to Food from Zanzi for organizing this. I want to just know more about compliance. Let's say I really am interested. I'm a farmer. I stay in Limpopo or, Northwest where we constantly are experiencing. And cotton seems like, something that's going to still give me profits, even though, it's not irrigated. Where can I start in terms of compliance? As mentioned, associations. Is there any other compliance that I need, or I can just grow the cotton? It also sounds a bit too good to be true. So let's maybe also be practical about the challenges that cotton farmers experience.
Yeah, the first one will be you need to be rather close to a cotton ginnery because of there being a bulky crop, so if somebody is interested in looking into cotton farming, the best thing is to email us and we send you a questionnaire out with the basic questions. Once we have that back, then we can do a desktop research and see where are you from? Will cotton be able to be grown there? And like I say, we immediately look and see how close or how far are you from a ginnery. There are 7 ginneries, cotton ginneries in the country. So to be close to a ginnery, do the information search with us. We will assist you if cotton will be viable. And then next, we will look at training and mentoring after that.
Thank you so much for that, Tertius. I see that Davido has his hand up. Davido, over to you.
Hello, hi. Thanks for the floor. Just going to ask you a few questions. But the thing is that I live in the UK and farm in Zimbabwe. I don't know the ins and outs of farming cotton, but what I wanted to ask was how many, I think they put it in bales, right? So I just wanted to ask, how many bales do you get per hectare? That's my question for tonight. It sounds exciting and everything, but to know how much cotton do I get per hectare and how big is the market?
Thank you so much for your question, Davido. Annette, Ms. Sithole, Petra Sitore, would you like to take this question?
For a 200 kg bale of seed cotton, it depends on how much is the average. In Komazi, for instance, the average over the past 3 years was 1,200 kilograms, about 6 bags of 200 kilograms each. That is on average. But also it depends on the weather conditions, the abiotic stresses. If they are absent, then you can even get more. I remember in 2018, on my farm, I got on average 1,500. So it means that about 7.5 bags per hectare of 200 kilograms each. Then he also asked about how big the market is. In South Africa, I don't think we can flood the market in the next 10 years because the consumption of cotton far outweighs the production in South Africa. We still need expansion of about 10 times of what we are producing now, so we can flood the market of cotton in South Africa. That's what I've gathered in my research.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sithole. Okay, maybe we can move on the conversation to climate. I think we spoke about that, and I think in the beginning we mentioned growing period. Annette, in the article that we did on Food for Mzansi, you also highlighted the importance of monitoring your crop weekly, that you can't just leave it to grow. Could you maybe expand a little bit on that, and also what type of soil does cotton prefer?
I just want to mention one very important thing that I think Tej has also touched on is the heat units. We call it day degrees or heat units that cotton likes. As he said, very sunny days, a lot of sunny days. So we need about a minimum, a real base minimum of 1,300, but preferably 1,500 and above heat units. So that's all the average of the day degrees over the season from day one after germination up to harvesting time. And it's got a life cycle of about 160 days, but even more, 160 to 170, sometimes even 180 days. So the problem is in areas like in the Free State, where the winter comes early, you get frost early, you get late rain sometimes, so the farmers can plant late. It's not the most popular place or preferable place to plant cotton, for an example, in the Free State, although it's been planted in some of the areas. So we want areas like Limpopo, like Tertius says, and Komazi Cotton, those areas where the winter comes in quite late, that we have a longer season. And this is also why we're looking at shorter varieties, that when under dryland, when it rains late, that the farmers, when they plant 2 weeks later, that the variety has a shorter growth period. Yeah, we plant the old traditional times of planting cotton, irrigated cotton, is normally in the middle of October. And we have to really wait for the soil temperatures to increase up to about 18 degrees. The base temperature for cotton is 15.5 degrees Celsius, but the seed doesn't germinate there. So we really want a temperature of above 17, preferably 18, for 5 to 10 days before we can plant the seed in the soil. So for dryland and other areas, they sometimes plant even late November. The dryland areas even plant early December, depending on when they get some rain, because you need some moisture in the soil for the seed to germinate. And then the plant just grows. I want to say almost a little bit more easier than the later weeks, because most of the plant is treated with seed treatments, fungus treatments, and also for the small-scale farmers, they do an insecticide treatment on the seed. So the first 4 to 6 weeks, there shouldn't be many pests on the cotton. Pests like thrips, in Afrikaans we call them blaaspoetjies, thrips or aphids is some of the common insects early in the season. And then after 6 weeks, we get plants to make buds, call them squares. It's little buds that eventually forms the flowers, and each of these buds develop into flowers and later into balls, into green balls, and then they dry out and ripen, and inside is the fiber, and then they open and burst to produce the white fiber. After 6 weeks, you get your first fruit formation, or these fruit bodies that we call buds or squares, and then they are really attacked by other pests. Now, the most important pests on cotton are the bollworm complex. There are 4 species of bollworms on South African cotton. One species that occurs in Zimbabwe and in other areas is the pink bollworm, and that species doesn't occur in South Africa. But the technology that we have in our seed is the BT technology, or it's an insect-resistant technology. So we don't normally have to spray for bollworms on cotton. But tradition, we used to start scouting. Now, scouting is when you start counting the pests on the cotton. So there are thresholds or numbers of pests where you have to spray, which they've determined through research, which is sort of the maximum number of pests allowed of certain pests. And at that specific threshold, you are then supposed to spray a specific chemical registered for that pest. But now with the BT cotton, we don't have to spray. It's normally not necessary because the plant has this inherent control. When the bollworm larvae feed on the plant, they die. So we still have to scout though, because under a lot of rain or a lot of drought, the stress of the plant can cause the protein not to be expressed thoroughly in the plant. And then you can get incidences of bollworms on cotton. So from about 6 weeks, you start counting weekly all the insects. You count your aphids, we call them jacids. They are actually leafhoppers. We count the bollworms for any presence of bollworms. We count also an insect called the stainer later in the season, especially. These insects stain the lint or the white fluffiness, and then, of course, stain and bring down the quality of the cotton, and then the farmer eventually gets a lower price for his cotton. So the stainers, and then spider mite is also quite a red spider mite, a big secondary pest on cotton. So interesting with this new technologies that we have, insect-resistant technologies, the secondary pests have become more prominent on cotton. So we are really scouting or recording the secondary pests and not really the primary pests, which were the bollworm complex. And this goes on especially around about 8-9 weeks after planting. We get the flowers. Cotton has beautiful flowers. You first get a white flower, and then after 3 days after fertilization, they go pink, and then they eventually drop off in a little ball form. And then the balls have a growth period of a couple of weeks before they reach maturity. So this is really a very sensitive time, from 8 to 12 weeks, even to 14 weeks of the plant, where irrigation and fertilizer and sunshine are very important factors that the plant needs to actually form the little balls and to ripen the fiber inside. When the balls form, that's when the stainers come in and the red spider mite. The one thing that farmers tend to do is to not spray, not count the insects, and then just spray sort of as a routine. And we really like to reprimand farmers not to do that, or encourage them not to do that, but to actually monitor the insects. It's an intensive crop. You must know your pests. That's why Tertius also gives training to the small-scale farmers. You must be able to identify them and to count them, because otherwise you're spraying unnecessary. You're putting unnecessary pesticides in the environment, but also on your cotton. We try and encourage the farmers to form an integrated IPM approach, which is actually inter-pest management approach, which is really to count insects, to count the pests, to count the beneficial insects. So the beneficial insects are those that actually feed on the other pests, like ladybirds that feed on aphids and spiders and those things. So we're taking into consideration all the other beneficial insects on cotton, and to try and spray less. Otherwise, what happens if you just spray pyrethroids, it's a group of contact insecticides. If you just overspray them, you get an increase of your secondary pests, because your beneficial insects, you've wiped them out by spraying too many pesticides. So it's an old concept, but it's still one of the better approaches to have on cotton, and it should be done on all crops, really. It's an intensive crop to monitor. Also, the growth of the plant needs to be monitored, especially under irrigation. There's some growth regulators registered on cotton. We don't want too big plants. We don't want them like 1.5 meters high. We preferably want shorter plants, compact plants with a lot of balls, because the balls are the money. The balls represent the income for the farmer. We want to retain the balls. And you can get called shedding of squares or buds because of plant stresses. Too much herbicides, too little herbicides, too much insecticides, drought, all these things can cause part of his crop. And what you want to do is within the first 7 to 14 weeks, it's the time that the plant puts on the fruit. And you have to retain or keep those fruit on the plant. And if the plant stresses or is not treated properly or in the right way, it sheds those fruiting bodies. You get nice plants, but with very few balls on. So, it's a great plant, but it's a little bit more intensive than other crops, I think, like some of the vegetable crops also. But you need a bit of training, but it's a very rewarding plant, I think. And, you can create a good income from the crop.
Wow, Gugu, Dr. Annette is really giving us a world of experience here tonight on Gather to Grow. I'm in awe, to be honest.
Thank you so much. And, my next question was actually going to be on pest management, in terms of diseases as well and pests that our cotton is prone to. So I think you touched so much on that, which we really appreciate. I guess my next question would be the post-harvest handling, because cotton is such a delicate crop. So we obviously need a lot of labor to hand pick it. But what about storage? How do we store cotton? Does it need to be graded? How does that happen? And, in terms of transportation, when we take it to the markets, does it need temperature controlled trucks? If you guys could shed some light on just the post handling of cotton, that would be awesome.
I will just talk about the quality analysis. Maybe Tertius can talk about the harvesting and the picking, because I think that's more of interest for small scale farmers who might be interested in starting to plant cotton. I just want to mention that Cotton SA has a Bremen accredited laboratory. It's run by very experienced people. And I just want to say that, the cotton is sold on specific parameters or qualities that the fibers have. And just in short, you get the analysis of the fiber involves the determination of the length of the fibers, also the thickness of the fibers, the fineness that we refer to as the micronair of the fiber. So there are big machines that can actually measure the length and the micronair or the fineness of the fiber, and also the strength of the fiber, how strong the fibers is if they can twist. So there are different norms or ranges where the fiber must fall to represent different classes. When the cotton is delivered at the mill or the gin, then there's a sample taken and it gets a barcode on, and those samples are sent to Cotton SA for analysis. There's a small cost to the sample analysis, but then it goes through a whole process to analyze the fiber. They also look at the grade. Now the grade involves things like leaf trash. trash. So how clean it's picked, how much contamination there is, other things like sticks or sand or dust or anything, polypropylene or anything that's in the fiber, and then also the color. And there's a lot of measurements that take place, but then the farmer gets a certificate, quality or a grading certificate back from our laboratory, and it goes back to the ginnery, and then the farmer is then paid out as a second payment based on the quality of his lint. And then the lint is wrapped after ginned in big bales with plastic, and then it's marketed. So I just want to say that all our cotton is exported, most of it. There's a very little uptake locally, and we can't produce enough. So there's no farmer that sits with cotton, that there's always a market, and that's what's great about cotton. But maybe Tertius can tell you a little bit about the hand picking and how tricky that is and how clean the cotton is.
Thanks so much, Dr. Bennett. Tertius, are you still with us?
I'm listening and enjoying this a lot. Thank you very much once again for the opportunity. When handpicking, the workers or the farmers will pick the cotton from the plant, put it in plastic, and unfortunately, you can't use any plastic. Dr. Bennett has just now mentioned, once there's plastic or any other debris in the cotton, then the grades will be, the quality will go down. It's very important to understand, to just pick the cotton, put it into plastic bags. Smallholders put their cotton into wool packs. So those big wool packs that Petros was referring to, where they get around about 200 kilograms of seed cotton into that. They compact it, and then they tie it down with cotton string to not contaminate the cotton with any other fiber. And then it's being packed onto the truck. You don't need a cold chain for cotton. So once it's in the bags and it's nice and tight, you need to have to take it out of the rain. It will deteriorate. So from the field, from the plastic bag into the wool pack, once it's packed, it needs to go under roof for the elements and the rain not to get to it. Otherwise, it will rot, it will deteriorate. Then it's packed onto a truck, and then it's being taken to the cotton ginnery. So the market is the first line of the value chain. For the farmer is the cotton ginnery, where it will be delivered and stored. And then it's out of the hand of the farmer. Also, that you don't need special tools. For citrus and lots of other fruit, you need to have special tools to harvest, and the expert ladies that pick the cotton can do up to 40 kilograms a day. They pick, and it's a real opportunity for job creation. Of course, you can't start early. There's dew on the cotton. It must dry out before you can start picking it. You'll understand, and when you take that moisture into the bag, it might rot. Just after the first sun, and the dew is from the cotton, then the picking can start and through the best part of the day.
Thank you so much, Mr. Schoeman. I'm actually mind blown by this conversation, because cotton is literally a hidden gem. And through these conversations that we get to understand as farmers, the opportunities, the markets that are there, we diversify. So thanks a lot for sharing. I have one last question, and I think Mr. Petros can answer this, because he mentioned that he's part of a co-op. And, a lot of the times we see that co-ops aren't so successful. So, Mr. Petros, maybe you can advise us on how, especially as young farmers, can, make a cooperation and start cotton farming.
I think the best thing to start a co-op is to look for like-minded people, because sometimes people join the co-op because they want to lead. And if you ask them, why do you want to lead? They don't have anything to say. So like-minded people who are serious about working together, that can help. Sometimes we also make a mistake of looking for our family members only. We want to find that they just come in not to work, but to come as passengers in a train. As you say, it is difficult. Some co-ops are not functional, but we are lucky in Komazi, because those co-ops are formed by seasoned farmers, people who want to join the co-op because they are already farmers, not to just come in just like that. So I don't know if I answered your question, because I think there are people who still want to start farming. It's better for them to join old co-ops if you have not yet started to farm. Don't start your own novice cooperatives. Join a seasoned cooperative so that you can learn from the experienced people that are there.
Absolutely, Mr. Petros. Well said. Farming, at the end of the day, boils down to experience. We'll definitely take home with us the fact that we need to get mentorship and join seasoned co-ops, as you have suggested. One last question from my side. Mr. Schoeman also mentioned that starting cotton farming does not require a lot of tools. Maybe he can touch on that, especially now that Mr. Petros has also highlighted that if you join a co-op, you share all the resources, you share the tractors and other machinery that cotton farming needs. So, Mr. Schoeman, what kind of tools are needed in cotton farming?
Now your field is fenced, you've got a road there, you've taken out the rocks and the stumps, and once that is done, before the raining season, you need to do land preparation, loosen the soil, that once the rain comes, it will penetrate the soil, and like Dr. Bennett has said, then you wait for the right heat units. With moisture, you plant then on a dry land field. So you will have to have a ripping done on that, approximately 350 to 400 millimeters deep. It's very important to have a good seed bed. So once you've ripped the fields, the rain comes and then you can diss it, then it's a fine seed bed, because we don't plant cotton deep, very shallow, 2 centimeters deep. It needs to be planted, because if you don't have a proper seed bed, then there will be unevenness, and some of the seed won't even have soil covering it. So you need to have a perfect seed bed, and for that you will need a disc harrow. There is quite a few entrepreneurs in the rural areas these days where you don't have a co-op that you can actually hire, somebody to do this for you. But we have a system in Komazi where we have a farmers production service unit where we have equipment centrally, and then they work for the farmers in the area. For Cotton SA, we would like to extend our services as mentoring for the farmers and help them put this together. There's also training. David Mtsweni is our trainer. He does the AgriCita accredited training with 4 modules each a week throughout the year. So before planting, to understand a bit of finances, land preparation. The second module is about planting and what goes with that. Then it's the pests and weeds to be looked after. And the last module, he learns the farmers how to harvest and to do that. Yes, you need implements to break the land and to prepare the seed bed, but it's also possible to plant it by hand. As I said, it's not a deep planting process, so you can plant it by hand. Once you have proper spacing, it's usually in a 900 to a meter row width and about 4 to 5 seeds in 1 meter. Once it's not raining, then you can do thinning by where you take plants out, because remember, cotton has got a tap root and it go and fetch the water. But if you have less plants on a square meter, then the balance of the plants that you leave over can actually utilize the balance of that water.
Thank you so much, Mr. Schoeman. I see Petros was also unmuting his mic. Do you have something to add to that, Mr. Sithole?
What I want to mention is that I've also learned a lot. I believe that some of our listeners decided now, because cotton has got ample job creation opportunities, wealth creation also is attached to it, they are going to consider expanding on cotton, especially because we cannot flood the cotton market in the foreseeable future. South Africa is consuming more garments, cotton garments, than it produces cotton. So if all the areas...
Thank you so much, Mr. Sithole. You've also given us lots to think about and lots of insight here tonight on Gather to Grow. As we close off, I'm going to ask each of our speakers just to share a last tip, a last message to everyone on the session. Also just a last piece of advice. Dr. Bennett, can we start with you?
It does take a number of years to get into it. You can't think you're going to do production 100% after 1 year. So most of the commercial farmers have been planting for many years. Every year they do better, and they're planting bigger areas, and they're buying expensive equipment. So they invest in the farm, in the cotton, and so they have to plant a number of minimum hectares to actually make it worth their while to have invested in picking equipment. So under irrigation, it can be an expensive crop, but the return is fantastic, and there's always a market for it. So you're not going to sit with a surplus of bales that you can't sell or that's not being sold. The one thing that is important is that with the associations that the small-scale farmers must maybe connect to is the agreements that they have with the ginnery and the contracts that they have pre-season, before the season, that they connect with the gin manager and say how much hectares they're going to plant and how much is the estimate of bales they're going to deliver, that the gin knows that they have like a contract to gin their cotton to actually process it further. So that's quite an important aspect, and that's for small-scale farmers where they maybe deliver in a combined sort of effort. Cotton is great. The price is very good. Please plant cotton.
Thanks so much, Dr. Bennett. Tertius, your last word, and then I'll give the last word from our farmer in the house, Tertius, Petra Sitore as well.
I think it's a wonderful crop, and there's definitely opportunities there. My dream is to see the smallholders migrating to more commercial sizes and standard.
Thank you so much, Mr. Schoeman. Mr. Sithole, last word from your side. I think you've given us so much sound advice, but last word of advice to anyone who's considering venturing into cotton farming.
If there are people who are considering venturing into farming and they don't have anything in mind to farm, let them consider cotton farming, because as long as it can germinate into 4 leaves, the chances of it dying are very slim. So you always get something out.
Thank you so much, Mr. Petros Sithole. Gugulethu, that brings us to the end of tonight's Gather to Grow. I know you have farm spaces happening tomorrow as well. What can we expect?
Thank you so much to our lovely speakers, Dawn. I really have a different mindset when it comes to cotton farming. Most importantly, I think I'm educated. I'm more informed now about the industry and the ample opportunities it has. Yes, it's going to take time. And I know us young farmers, really aren't, maybe too keen, but it's definitely worth it. And it's something that we should be looking out for.
Thanks, Gugu. And thank you once again to our speakers. You've given us so much to think about and consider if we want to do cotton farming here in South Africa. Thank you so much to everyone else who joined. And remember, you can find this article on Food for Mzansi. That's www.foodformzansi.co.za. It has all of the information that the speakers touched on tonight and even more. And you can, of course, also get the session on our YouTube channel as well. From me, Dawn Numbu, Food for Mzansi's audience and engagement editor. Have a great evening and catch you again next week. Same time, same place.